EFA space finish coat, using block and tile splitters, using manual chisels, shears, or utility knives. Other tasks involving occasional brief exposures that are incidental to primary work. So you might have an occasional carpenter or electrician that's out there maybe 15 minutes or less during their shift using a handheld drill in concrete masonry, something like that. So, but it's got to be 15 minutes or less per shift. So just an occasional activity. And again, some tasks that could generate very high short-term exposures include abrasive blasting and grinding, which are typically associated with higher levels of invisible dust. Another frequently asked question, do construction employers have to consider exposures from other contractors when considering the exposure to their own workers? Absolutely. So employers need to consider these secondary exposures, and we'll talk about that some more. There are crossover standards to the silica standard, including hazard communication, which has to do with communicating hazards on a multi-employer workplace, such as a construction site. The HAZCOM standard is identical to general industry, and in there you have to have methods of employers to inform other employers of any precautionary measures that need to be taken to protect employees. This would be good information to share possibly in a weekly foreman meeting. If you know you're going to be having areas that you're going to have to section off, like maybe scaffold, taking down the scaffold, cleaning off the scaffold. You might need to cordon off something like that. Respiratory protection is also a crossover standard. Again, it's identical to general industry. And this kicks in where respiratory protection is required. The employer has to institute a respiratory protection program. Every program has to have an administrator. Your administrators are myself for Hardison Downey and Eric Bell for Kitchen. Again, with HAZCOM, employees will have access to the labels on containers of crystalline silica and also to the safety data sheet. And employees have to be trained in accordance with HAZCOM, also related to silica standards. The training has to address the health effects of the cancer, lung disease, things like that. It has to be included in your training. So how to comply, the big question. Employers have to have a silica exposure control plan if they're going to do these activities that generate the silica dust. So not everybody has a silica exposure control program. Your program has to be based on, in the standard they give you at table 1, which we'll talk about. It's either got to be that or an alternative exposure control method. These most generally require the error monitoring of the individual. So the plan is going to be a description of the task in the workplace that involves the exposure, the engineering controls, work practices, respiratory protection used to limit the exposure, a description of your housekeeping measures, and a description of procedures used to restrict access to work areas, how you're going to barricade and form such as that. Some more frequently asked questions. If employee exposures will remain below that actionable level, do you have to have a written exposure control plan for the work site? No. If they're going to remain below the actionable level, you don't have to have a written exposure control plan for the work site. However, if there's any chance they're going to go above and